Brother Ray Zapplido, President of De La Salle University, the Honorable Mayors of Manila and Quezon City, Maria Ressa, founder and CEO of Rappler, a staunch defender of free and fair reporting, and of course a great partner for us at the United Nations. Eminent speakers and panelists that we will meet this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, good afternoon. 10 years ago, as we heard, Mashable, the United Nations Foundation, and the United Nations Development Programme teamed up to launch the Social Good Summit as a collective effort to tackle some of the most important issues of our time. It brought together global thought leaders and activists for a day of constructive dialogue and on-stage activation. Every summit since has had a powerful and, I believe, lasting impact in our consciousness. And activism for social good is celebrated and attendees are galvanized, hopefully, into action. And in the Philippines, Rappler, since 2012, has been leading the summit with equally impactful results. And I would again like to thank Maria Ressa and acknowledge our friends at Rappler for convening the summit here with a view of sparking positive action in our digital age. 4 years ago, in 2015, I was at the Social Good Summit here in the Philippines and spoke about the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, also known as the Global Goals, that had just then been adopted by all United Nations member states as a universal call to action, to end poverty, to protect our planet, and to ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030. Now, 4 years after the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, and as we've launched into this agenda, I believe that collectively we are making progress, but the picture is perhaps not as rosy as we would have liked it to be. In fact, no country is on track to meeting all the goals. And half of the world's nations are likely to miss the target of SDG number 1, no poverty. And we are still losing in many areas. 1 million species are threatened with extinction. We are eroding, we continue to erode the very foundations of our economies, livelihoods, food security, health and quality of life. High-income countries, like, for instance, where I am from, the Nordic countries, top the global ranking for SDG achievement. But they obtained their worst ratings on SDG 14, life below or life in water, and SDG 15, life on land, so the planetary perspectives of the SDG. As we saw yesterday in the global climate strike, young people around the world are taking to the streets to protest the lack of environmental action by governments and businesses. We hope that they are listened to. We are confronted by threats arising from climate crisis, poverty and inequality, protracted conflict, migration and displacement, and the rapid changes in demography and technology. To address these effectively will require effective cooperation across borders, sectors, and generations. Failure to do so will have far-reaching consequences for the welfare of our children and our grandchildren, our planet itself. But just as we need bold collective action more than ever, multilateralism, when countries come together around shared values and shared objectives is being called into question. Unilateralism is on the rise as the world becomes more multipolar and also, at the same time, more polarized. In many parts of the world, there is growing disconnect between people and institutions, and renewed support for global cooperation could not be more urgent. And this, in fact, this urgency is a driving factor for us at the United Nations as we turn 75 already next year. 2020 will mark the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. Our 75th year will be less of a celebration of achievements so far, but rather used as a pretext to seek means to rejuvenate global cooperation through dialogues across the world around the future people hope for, the future people aspire to. Threats to that future and the tools needed for global cooperation to overcome these threats. A UN at 75 and beyond campaign will launch the biggest global conversation on how we will navigate this turbulent period for the world. Dialogues will be held at the global, regional, national, and local levels and will be convened by member states, civil society, academia, labor and business groups, the youth, and by the UN itself, under the direct leadership of our Secretary General. And these dialogues will be framed by three questions. The first, what kind of world is it that we are aspiring to create? Imagine the world in 2045 when the UN turns 100. What kind of future world will we then have bequeathed to our children and to our grandchildren? The second question is, where is the world now heading? What would 2045 look like if current trends continue? Will we have achieved the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 and addressed the threats that we face at present? Or could we expect a different set of challenges to have emerged? And finally, we will ask ourselves, what action is then needed to close the gap, if there is a gap, and likely there will be a gap? The difference between the future we want and the future that our children will probably inherit if we are complacent. These dialogues, which will be conducted throughout 2020, will produce the first ever repository of crowdsourced global solutions. The United Nations will set up both digital and analog feedback loops to gather views and recommendations and solutions emerging from those dialogues. And I hope and I look forward to seeing all of you participate in that dialogue come 2020. So in the same way that the My World survey, which was conducted from 2008 to 2012, and in which people were asked to name their most urgent needs, their priorities, helped to shape the Sustainable Development Goals. UN at 75 hopes to inspire us to further reimagine the future and to restore or reinforce our confidence in an inclusive multilateralism, the world working together, again around shared values and shared objectives, as the most effective way to overcome the challenges of our current era. As we enter now a decade of continued action on the SDGs until 2030, and as we ask for more urgency and ambition on climate change, with 2020 being a crucial year, the United Nations will continue to evolve in step with current and emerging needs in order to remain relevant to all. So the United Nations is not in a Red Queen's race, running as fast as we can without going anywhere or moving anywhere. Rather, we are taking a giant leap of faith with you to get ahead of the problems that stand in the way of the future we collectively want. And we enjoin you, especially the youth, to support the building of a networked and inclusive multilateralism through the power of social media. Now, we're all aware of the potential as well as the pitfalls of digital platforms and social media. On the one hand, they are, of course, unbeatable as a networking tool. But at the same time, this power can be misused to further divide our world, to promote falsehood, and to sow hate, even. In other words, to further polarize our world. Digital platforms and social media, for their accessibility and reach, can be a double-edged sword, but one that you, especially, can harness for good. So I invite you to continue to discover the social good, to push the boundaries of your online lives in order to engage just as enthusiastically in efforts to build our common future. We're excited to see how your online engagement ripens into offline action that will have a transformative impact on your personal lives, your families, and your communities. The 2030 Agenda, so the Sustainable Development Goals, are a roadmap to our collective future. You and your children have, of course, a great stake in their achievement. So don't be satisfied. Don't be manipulated. Don't be the victims of those who seek to hoard power and resources for self-interest. Hack, disrupt negative trajectories and impediments to positive change. The world in 2030 and beyond is the future that you will inherit and that you will live in. Make that future bright. Make it the future that we want, the future that we need. It's within our reach if we all pull together towards that objective. So thank you very much for this opportunity to say a few words at this Social Good Summit. I wish us all a very engaged and exciting afternoon. Maraming salamat po.